I wanted to begin by asking you guys, what do you think is the significance of, importance of, and or is there any, to discussing and listening to music at such a strange time in the world and in life? Why would we bother spending time talking about music?
Usually capturing like the moment, right? I mean, a lot of composers use music to capture what was going on in their lives and tell a story through it. So I mean, like, if people were to write a story about, or compose said piece of like what's going on now.
So a composer is using music to tell a story. What is that an example of? If someone's telling you something, what are they doing with you? What's the interaction called? Communication.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
And connection. I know it was an oblique way of asking. What is the other purpose? So for communication, and then I just gave it away. Say again?
Unity and like bringing people together.
Exactly. It gives it a sense of community, unity and community, that we aren't alone, and that one of my favorite documentaries about music it's called The Golden Age of Conductors, and a very famous classical record producer says that when you listen to a great piece of music, you feel as if the composer is saying to you, I too have struggled and I've made it through, and so will you. It's a sense of bridging a gap. And then, so that's why we're going to talk about music, because it's still incredibly valid. And in fact, the more isolated we are, somehow the more significant it becomes. Did you ever hear of a very sweet little cartoon from the 1980s called An American Tale, about a little mouse? There's a beautiful song in that that was one of my favorite songs as a little kid. And he says, somewhere out there beneath the pale moonlight. And one of the lyrics is that... And even though I know how very far apart we are, it helps to think we might be wishing on the same bright star. Because he's been separated from his family. And
I definitely heard that before.
It's a very, very pretty song. It's called Somewhere Out There. And the idea that even though they're apart, that they are still together by looking up at the sky. Even though we're all apart, we're all unified by the fact that we're musicians. We're all... we can all listen to Beethoven and feel connected to what his struggle was. What was his struggle? What is Beethoven most famous for, aside from his music?
Being deaf.
Being deaf, exactly. Can you imagine what it would have been like to be the world's greatest pianist, the world's greatest composer, and then to be losing your hearing? So why are we going to focus on Beethoven today? Does anyone know what the significance of Beethoven this year is? No one? No one's seen all the adverts for Carnegie Hall?
Isn't it his 250th?
Yes, it is. Well done. So every orchestra in the world, before COVID came and stole our lives from us, was planning these great big Beethoven celebrations. So let's talk a bit about Beethoven. First things first, who were the two main composers before, or name one of the most important composers directly before Beethoven?
Haydn, one of them?
Haydn, Toby, yes. Who was the next main composer born after, that is composing after Haydn?
Mozart?
Mozart, who said that? Well done, Nathan. This is called a triumvirate. It's a great word. I'll spell it for you. Triumvirate. Triumvirate. It means a collection of three significant or important people. You can have a triumvirate of politicians. You can have a triumvirate, in this case, of artists. It's people who have a large influence and a large collective power and strength together. So the classical triumvirate with a big capital C talks about these three composers mainly. Now, Haydn was called, his nickname was Papa Haydn, because he was the first one of the three to focus on specific genres. He wrote many string quartets, he wrote many symphonies, he wrote many operas that we don't really perform anymore. Could anyone guess how many symphonies Haydn wrote?
112.
It's like over 100, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's 104. 104 symphonies. How many symphonies did, this is a question for Ellie, how many symphonies did Beethoven write? Sorry, not Beethoven, Mozart.
He wrote like 30, I think.
A little bit more. He wrote 41. So how many did Haydn write?
104.
104. How many did Mozart write?
41.
41. And Conan, how many did Beethoven write?
Not sure.
Does anyone know? So what's Beethoven's most famous tune ever? Everyone sing it.
Uh,
Yeah. So okay. So in fact, I don't think there's a correct answer. I was thinking of da 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 da. The Ode to Joy, right? What symphony does the Ode to Joy come from? Wyatt, do you know which symphony the Ode to Joy comes from?
9.
The Ninth Symphony. So we had, how many symphonies did Haydn write?
104.
104. How many did Mozart write?
46.
41.
41.
41.
104, 41, and then Beethoven wrote how many?
9.
9. Right. Someone do some detective work in your brain right now and tell me what was happening. How come Haydn wrote 104? How come Mozart wrote 41, which is 60 fewer? How come Beethoven only wrote 9, which is 30 fewer again? Why were the composers writing fewer and fewer symphonies?
I guess kind of music was getting more epic and like moving more towards the Romantic era, and like
very
larger
good
scale.
Yes, exactly. The scale was expanding. And so what was happening was that the content, the nature of the music was changing. But there's another reason. Haydn had an employer. Haydn was one of the last full-time employed composers employed by an aristocrat named Esterházy, which was in Hungary. So Haydn was writing to order. He was like a chef where you say, okay, I'd like my steak medium rare. So he was writing what he was being asked to write. Mozart moves to Vienna from Salzburg. Salzburg's a very small town. Vienna was the musical capital. Mozart moves in his early 20s and he starts writing. He's no longer affiliated with a court, so he's got to make a living just from performing and just from selling his music to publishers. So he has to try and write what he thinks the audiences will like. So it's like making a TV show or a movie. So Mozart starts to write for taste. And then Beethoven says, okay, that's what they did. He learns everything that he could from them. So Beethoven then starts to write in this new style, the Third Symphony. So what did we say? What's one of the main things that everyone knows about Beethoven that's non-musical?
Deaf.
He's deaf.
He goes deaf, right? So in 1803, he goes out to the countryside. A doctor prescribes him to go out to the countryside to rest his ears. This is how unsophisticated medicine was back then. They say, you're going deaf, go and rest your ears, because Vienna's too loud. Go and be in the countryside in the silence. So he goes out to the countryside and he realizes that he's going deaf. He realizes, therefore, that his career is probably not going to happen. He becomes extremely depressed and he decides that he's going to take his own life and end everything. So he starts to write a will, and he writes dividing up his property to give it to his brothers and whatever. And then halfway through writing this will, which was done in a town called Heiligenstadt, he realizes that he can't kill himself because he's got too much to say. He feels so much inside him that he has to express it. So halfway through writing the will, he says, but no, I will not leave this earth until I have given all to my art that my art demands of me. And that becomes a manifesto. What is a manifesto? Someone tell me.
Something that you live by?
Exactly. Well done, Henry. It becomes like a declaration of intent. It becomes a creed. It becomes something that is going to serve as the basis on which he lives. So he then devotes himself entirely to his art. But when you think about Mozart writing stuff in Vienna to try and make the public happy, and Haydn writing stuff to orders when his boss says to him, write me this or that or the other, Beethoven is now decided, because he was going deaf and because he was ready to end it all anyway, that what his music has to do is it has to say something. So he starts, after the Heiligenstadt Testament, he writes the he writes the Third Symphony. And the Third Symphony has a nickname. Does anyone know it? It's the Eroica. Has anyone heard of that? So the Eroica, what can anyone guess? It's an Italian word. What does Eroica mean in English?
Something to do with hero.
Exactly. Well done, Kona. Exactly. It's hero. It means heroic. Now, Beethoven is starting to write in what the equivalent of prose. So he's writing a novel, whereas Mozart was writing poetry. Do you understand the difference? Then, the other thing is, it's got a nickname. And the nickname is the Eroica. And from that, we have to, okay, so is this a theme? Is this something that he was trying to tell us about the piece of... And then we know from history that he actually dedicated it to Napoleon. Now, who was Napoleon?
French dictator.
French dictator.
French dictator.
Got
Right.
exiled 2
Now,
times.
So why would Beethoven, who was an Enlightenment composer, who believed above all in so the French Revolution had happened in what year? Do you remember?
1789.
1789. Who said that? Well done, Conan.
Thank you.
1789, and the credo, the manifesto, the hashtag of the French Revolution was what?
Declaration.
Natural rights.
Yeah, something with rights.
So it's 3 words: égalité, fraternité, liberté.
Yeah.
Equality, brotherhood, and liberty, freedom. Right? Sound familiar? Do you think that America had similar ideas a few years before? Of course they did.
Yeah.
Beethoven grows up with these Enlightenment principles and ideas of liberty and equality as part of his worldview. So why then would he dedicate a piece to a dictator?
Because they didn't think he was a dictator at first.
Exactly, Ellie, exactly. When Napoleon first took over the army, before he crowned himself emperor, he was spreading the ideas of democracy across Europe. He was going into all the aristocracies and he was changing them by saying, this is not the way to live, and he was conquering them with his army. So he was quite convincing. But then he crowns himself emperor, and guess what? Beethoven gets so angry, he feels so betrayed, he feels so disappointed in his hero that he takes a knife and he scratches so vehemently on the page the front page of the symphony, that there's a hole to this day in the front page of the Eroica where Beethoven cuts out the name of Napoleon because he was so angry.